morning, everyone. Let's kick off this meeting today. I'm Nafi Shah, and glad to have you all here. Let's get started with a few housekeeping notes. First, for today's agenda, we will talk about some housekeeping notes, and we have announcement about rebate programs and permitting and inspections updates, and inspection pass rates, solar and energy storage system, and our process flows. And then Austin Fire Department will give us a presentation for today. All right. So to help this meeting run smoothly, please turn your mic off and mute yourself whenever it's possible. Please direct your questions to the chat box. We will monitor chat box and make time to address questions after each session. However, if you prefer to ask a question verbally, please wait until the designated question slides after each session. We will track attendance, and this meeting is required for all contractors. So please listen up toward the end of the meeting, and then we will give you a time to sign in with your name and your company name in the chat box. This is how we record that you were present at the meeting and get you moving along with your registration process. So please don't forget to leave your name and your company's name at the end of this session. Wait times. We are currently about 3 weeks from the time you submit the application till LOI. Inspections are 4 weeks wait time, and final documentation review come in the final payment to your customer is about 3 weeks as always, as well, sorry. The upcoming meetings, the next meeting is the technical meeting, which is scheduled for Thursday, May 19, and is mandatory for the new contractors to get on the list. And if you hire new technical employees, please let them know to join that meeting. And we do recommend contractors to get on the list by attending this meeting, and we also highly recommend those folks to attend the technical trainings, as it is a source of information and code updates. The next meeting is the administrative meeting. It's scheduled for June 16, and that is mandatory for the new contractors to get on the list. And if you hire new employees that are likely to work on ECP to submit applications, we really recommend they attend administrative meeting. The next general meeting is scheduled for Thursday, July 21st. Well, all contractors, whether you are trying to get on the list or you are already on the list, are required to attend our general quarterly meeting. The multifamily CBI program overview also is scheduled on May 6th, and we have updates for you on that meeting as well. Please note that this meeting is recorded, and we will send out the presentation after the meeting. The value of solar rate review meetings is coming up, and the in-person meeting is scheduled on April 27th in Manchaca Public Library, and the virtual one is scheduled on May 11th. And you can get more information or register to attend this meeting through the link is available to you here. The good news is we are going to launch the new Solar 101 or the solar education course in May, and we are so excited about that one. And the other good news is the multi-family CBI program will be launched on May 9, and we look forward to seeing you all there. All right, any questions? I'll pass the time to Brad, I guess.
Thanks, Nappy. Yeah, in one slide here, I'll cover the quarterly report for the rebate programs. So our annual goals are 7,000 kilowatts, so 7 megawatts for residential, 5 for commercial, and we have a rebate budget to get there. So with your help, so far in fiscal year Q2 here, we're about 36% of the way for our residential and 14% of the way for our commercial program. We definitely hope to see continued participation in these programs, and we do have a lot in that commercial queue. We are expecting to see that fill out, over the next quarter or so. So this is how we're at right now. I think the next slide is just to ask if there are any questions. So if y'all have, if you want to look at the chart and ask questions, we can keep it on that slide. Or if you guys are feeling good, we can move on. We've got some really exciting presentations from the fire department today too. So sounds good. Thanks for all your hard work, everybody.
All right, I'll jump in, start us off with a couple inspection related updates. So we've run the numbers for the last quarter, so Q2 of fiscal year 2022, so January to March of this year. So the overall inspection pass rate over that 3-month period was 59%. And as you guys know, the pass rate threshold for contractors in the rebate program is 70%. So just on an overall basis, we're certainly below where we'd like to be. And the pass rate has been part of the factor of the longer wait times, although more of a minor factor overall. More of that is backlogs that we've been working through over the last few months. But the good news is that wait time is starting to come down again. But as far as this pass rate is concerned, this is just, a reminder to please make sure to do a thorough, quality check of your systems against Section C of the Distribution Interconnection Guide before you request inspection from us, and to make sure to review those deficiencies closely when we send emails for failed inspections, just to make sure that you're making corrections in accordance with what our inspectors are requesting. But yes, a reminder that contractors who fall below a 70% pass rate for their final inspections over the quarter will receive a formal warning. That's with a minimum of 4 final inspections completed over the quarter. And if a contractor's pass rate remains below 70% in the next quarter after that, it may potentially face suspension from the rebate program for that poor performance. The pass rate calculation includes all rebate and non-rebate final inspections that involve solar. So any energy storage systems only inspections, which I know some of y'all have been doing more of lately, those types of inspections will not be included in this review, because that review is specifically for solar related inspections. The pass rate calculation does also include inspections failed due to no-shows or late cancellations, where that cancellation is requested less than 24 hours in advance. because it makes it very difficult for us to fill that slot. And, as a courtesy, we would like to have more than 24 hours notice before canceling any scheduled inspection. The pass rate calculation does exclude all non-final inspections, like rough inspections, pre-wire for solar inspections, and meter checks, where we come back to review meters that may have been wired backwards or something to that effect after the final inspection has been passed. So just generally speaking, that's the way the pass rate is calculated, the types of inspections that are included in that calculation. And just, a reminder to continue referring to our interconnection guide, to our technical training presentation. The recording is available on YouTube now. And as a reminder, please also make sure that you close the installation step in the ECP portal. At the same time, you request inspection through the Smartsheet function on that web form. So when you go to that web form on the Austin Energy website to submit your inspection request, just at the same time, either right before or right after, just make sure you're going into ECP, into the corresponding enrollment, and just closing that installation step by uploading the invoice for the project, and also updating any measures that may have changed between the application and installation stages, and then just answering a couple fields in the installation page before hitting that process button to close the installation step. And for those of you who don't know, a reminder that when you close that installation step, you should get the confirmation by having it take you back to the workflow steps page. And you'll see that the post-inspection step of the ECP enrollment has been kicked off. So as long as that's done before your inspection is scheduled, then you'll be golden, because once you pass inspection, there won't be any further delay on the rebate application. We'll be able to continue processing that forward. But if you don't close that installation step first, then it will lead to a delay in the rebate processing, because we'll be relying on you to take that next step in ECP rather than us just being able to move forward. So anyway, that's all from me on the inspection front right now. The next parts of the presentation are going to take us through more updates related to permitting and inspections, which I'm going to turn it over to Micah in a second. And then after that, again, we'll have a presentation from the Austin Fire Department, specifically about energy storage systems and safety requirements to be aware of there. But I will go ahead and turn it over to Micah now with some updates about our coalition agreement with the Development Services Department.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Micah. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. So for those of you who don't know, the coalition agreement is the coalition agreement for solar inspection, solar and ESS inspections between DSD and Austin Energy, as it's officially called. It's an agreement that's an internal agreement, kind of behind the scenes, between DSD and Austin Energy. So DSD is the authority having jurisdiction for permitting and inspections in the city of Austin. So because they are the AHJ, they need to grant us, Austin Energy, authority to provide the inspections for solar and energy storage systems. So this agreement is renegotiated annually, and this year, for the first time, we are adding in officially the energy storage systems inspections into that agreement. So the agreement, this is what authorizes us to perform these inspections. It gives us the authority, and we are granted this authority under electrical permits with auxiliary power work types. So keep that in mind for when you're needing an inspection from Austin Energy for solar or energy storage. It will be a electrical permit with auxiliary power work type. So key updates for this year's coalition agreement. So Austin Energy solar inspections will inspect all energy storage system projects in the Austin Energy Service territory. So you use a auxiliary power electric permit every time for these. Again, if it's not Austin Energy, it's another story. But if it is Austin Energy, then you will use that auxiliary power permit, and Austin Energy will inspect those. So another update is pre-wire for solar. So just to clarify, pre-wire for solar, or solar pre-wire as it's written here, is not the same thing as a rough inspection. So when you're installing solar now, you're putting solar in or batteries in now, and you're going to hide conduit, or you're going to, sorry, install hidden conduit behind a wall or underground. You need a rough inspection to get that inspected before the conduit's hidden. But that's not solar pre-wire or pre-wire for solar. Pre-wire for solar is when you're just installing the infrastructure, the conduit for solar for the future, but there's no current solar installation being performed. So that's the difference. Is this? It's more of like more of a new construction thing where you're just installing that conduit in the walls. So we've done this in different ways depending on different jurisdictions in the past, and we've commercial and residential have been different. But we've united commercial and residential and across, in all situations under Austin Energy territory to use an auxiliary power electric permit for that. So pre-wire for solar will be under an auxiliary power electric permit, and Austin Energy will inspect those. There's some language on line side taps, so we want everybody to be on the same page and be knowledgeable about when a line side tap is being performed. So we're asking that you include line side taps in the description of work when those are being performed, even if they're being performed with a installation piercing tap or and not requiring a shutdown. So, and then all of this are pretty big announcements, but the one that I'm most excited about here is the process flows and work instructions for solar and energy storage system permitting and inspections. Yes, Michael, it'll happen at the same time. These process flows, we're working on getting them finalized. We had a stakeholder engagement on last Monday. So, wow, was that, yeah, a week and a half ago. And we got good feedback. So we're moving to the next step. A couple more clarifications, and then we're going to get these authorized and out the door. But we do have the documents that were provided as part of that public input engagement. You can click on this link here and you can get to those, and then we'll send the finalized documents out when they're done. But basically, there's a flow chart, 3 separate flow charts, one for residential, one for commercial for Austin Energy customers, and another for commercial for non-Austin Energy customers. And each flow chart or process flow, as we call them, has an accompanying work instruction. So each step in the process flow is numbered numerically, and then the work instructions match up to those numbers or those steps and provide a lot more detail and instructions about links or language to include and tips and tricks, all that kind of stuff. All right, next slide, please. All right, so more about these process flows and work instructions. So you can kind of see what they look like. Obviously, not gonna be able to read them at this Zoom, but encourage you to click that link in the previous slide and get into those. Let me know if you have any feedback. Each document defines the processes for different scenarios. So we define out residential versus commercial. Like I said, there are different flow charts and work instructions for each situation, residential versus commercial. We define whether it needs a plan review, so whether it goes through DSD's residential or commercial plan review to create those permits, or if you get what is called a trade-only permit, which they abbreviated at TOP, and that's a standalone permit, and you get those through the permit center, which utilizes the A, B, and C portal. So if you're using the A, B, and C portal, you're pulling trade-only standalone permits. But if you're going through commercial or residential plan review, then typically you're getting a building permit, that is a parent, and then you have child electric permits underneath that. We also differentiate between Austin Energy Territory and outside of Austin Energy Territory. So that includes the ETJ, and then for commercial, ETJ and non-Austin municipalities. So there's a map that we link to multiple times throughout these documents, and the map helps you determine whether your project is in City of Austin full or limited purpose. And full and limited purpose, for our purposes here, have the same rules. So we bulk them into one category: City of Austin full or limited purpose, full purpose or limited purpose. And then you also have City of Austin extraterritorial jurisdiction, the ETJ. And then there's a third potential jurisdiction, a non-Austin municipality. So that includes like Sunset Valley, Bee Caves, Lakeway, et cetera. So mainly that this matters. If you're in the ETJ, the rules, the processes just change. And then the non-Austin municipality, can't click on the video. Okay, well, we'll have to send these out. Thank you. So the non-Austin municipalities, this is really to help, it determines what the site planning process that you need to go through for commercial. Commercial, if you've done commercial projects, you'll know you need to ensure that you have a site plan, or that you may need to make adjustments to the site plan, or an exemption to the site plan. And so whether or not you have to go through those steps is determined by whether you're in Austin, City of Austin full or limited, the ETJ, or if you're in a non-Austin municipality. And we take you through that on these flow charts. Finally, scope of work: solar by itself, solar PV, energy storage systems, utility shutdowns, and solar pre-wire. These are generally the scopes of works that we've included. Utility shutdowns, one thing we're differentiating on and trying to bring clarity to, is when you need an ESPA, Electric Service Planning Application. And I just want to be super clear here. I'll say it out loud, and then check out the flow charts. But if you are performing work on the service and in need of a shutdown to perform work on the service, and in this case, the service is defined as the net meter, the main net meter, or anything on the utility side of the net meter. So the riser, the meter itself, not the PV meter, the net meter, the riser, the underground service, anything up to the transformer. If you're working on any of that, then you need the ESPA, and you will apply for an electric permit with an upgrade work type. Again, this is all in the document, so I just wanted to get it out there for folks who are listening. If you are just working on the customer side of the revenue meter, the main net revenue meter. So if you're just working on the conduit between the revenue meter and the service panel, if you're installing a gateway there, or if you're replacing the service panel itself, all of that is on the customer side of the revenue meter, and you do not need an ESPA, an ESPA, for that. The DGPA is different, so keep that in mind. DGPA is always required for Austin Energy solar projects or energy storage projects, or even pre-wire for solar projects. The ESPA is only required when you need a shutdown and you're performing work on the service, which is the net meter or anything on the utility side of that. And I think that might be the last slide. Do I have anything else? Let's look at the next slide. All right, and that takes me to the end of my presentation. Thank y'all.
All right, let me jump back in here. Believe we have the fire department on the line, although I'll just need to check and make sure they've got the right connections to our meeting here. But the next part of the presentation and the final part of the presentation will be a separate PowerPoint from the Austin Fire Department presented by Scott Stuckey regarding energy storage systems, related safety requirements, also introducing a new document. Oh, there we go, Scott. Perfect. Introducing a new document that we'll have soon on approved energy storage technologies, specifically approved by AFD and Austin Energy. But I won't go too far into that here. I'll turn it over to Scott and let you take over And feel free to ping me if you have any questions about technical issues.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I think you can hear me, and I should be just seeing a slide up on the page. It's that part of the moment where if you're the presenter, you're going, is everything working okay? So, Austin Energy, is everything working okay? Can you hear me?
I can
We
hear you,
can.
Scott.
We
Oh, I'm
can
not
hear
seeing
you.
a slide on my end. Is anybody else not seeing it?
No, I cannot see. Do you have anything you want to share? So you can go ahead and share your screen.
It's possible that it may be problematic for like a non-Austin Energy person to share. I don't think so, but if he's having trouble, he can also just quickly email his presentation to us, Nafi perhaps, and we can share it as well.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
I have my.
Let me try this again.
Right.
Sorry, folks.
No worries.
No worries.
Yeah, you're not the one sitting there stressing out. You seeing it?
Yes, you are here.
Ah.
There you go. Awesome.
There we go.
Thank you.
All right. Good news. All right. So, my name is Scott Stuckey. I'm an engineer in the fire marshal's office. Also on the line is Juan Espinoza, who is our supervising engineer. And Mark Villarreal and Chad Barner, who are also two of our other engineers. The presentation today is keep it as brief as I possibly can. What we've done is I've gone through, and this presentation is essentially on what are the requirements between the 2021 International Residential Code and the 2021 International Fire Code regarding lithium-ion battery energy storage systems, or as I affectionately like to call them, as the LIBES. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, there's 4 things or 5 things we're going to discuss, actually. We're going to talk about what our role is at the fire department is in distributed generation. Just a little background for me personally. I've got over 30 years of experience in the fire service, over 20 of it with AFD. So I didn't expect at this point in my career to be using the term distributed generation, but that's where we're at. I'll be briefly talking about the hazards of these energy storage systems when the lithium-ion battery chemistry is employed. I'll be talking about our regulatory authority for energy storage systems. I'll tell you that there's a permit, but it's not required for residential, but I always bring it up because we're asked that question. Then I'll quickly summarize the provisions between the IFC and the IRC for these installations. So, why is AFD involved in this? Well, number one, as a regulatory body, we're being asked a number of questions with regards to lithium-ion battery ESSs in IBC regulated buildings, but we're also being asked questions with regards to these systems in IRC regulated buildings. Probably being more questions asked about IRC regulated buildings because people are learning there are requirements in the International Residential Code for this. And when you look at the IRC throughout it, it's peppered with some statements that says, see the fire code. So for that reason, AFD is involved. Our real reason for another reason for it is the fact that energy storage systems is a new set of hazards. And that hazard really hasn't been being clearly communicated to regulatory officials, the design community, or the fire service. I will tell you, AFD is playing catch up right now with this. We have been putting a lot of energy into a lot of resources into training our first responders on this, but there's still a whole lot of questions that are being asked. We can see the 8 ball, we know what it looks like, but we're still learning the risk and how we're going to manage those. The other issue is that these things are small. They are not big. And so the units that you all are seeing or installing, are about the size of, they're about the size of a flat screen TV. So they're pretty easy to install. They are, and it's pretty easy for somebody to install it without a particular trade permit. At the end of the day, AFD's got a responsibility for approving the location and the required fire protection for these energy storage systems, regardless of the chemistry based upon its hazard. So at some point in this process, the model international codes has injected the fire service into this, which means that we are assuming some responsibility and taking that responsibility as it relates to residential installations, which is not uncommon. I mean, we already are regulating the wildland or construction in the wildland urban interface area. And AFD looks at every site plan for a subdivision as it relates to addressing the water supply, fire department access, roadways. So we're not concerned about this, but we do want to communicate that we are involved in the process and we're here to make it work. Here's the thing: an energy storage system isn't new to us. The only thing that is new to us is that now it's starting to present some different hazards. Generally speaking, everything that we deal with in our world is either looked at as a physical hazard or a health hazard. Energy storage systems, as I've currently known them up until the last 5 years, have not presented a physical hazard, meaning that it doesn't burn, it doesn't make something burn faster, it doesn't explode, or it doesn't deflagrate, which is a low speed explosion. Most of the stuff I've dealt with, or not me, but the Austin Fire Department has dealt with in battery systems, have just been health hazards, where it's a single exposure that either incapacitates you or injures you or causes death. In that photo, what you're seeing is a typical telecom or a typical data center battery system. And most of the systems in Austin today are all using valve regulated or flooded lead acid batteries. That's a reliable, safe technology, but it's pretty hard for it to present itself a physical hazard with the phenomena called thermal runaway, which you're going to hear me talk about a lot, because the fact that these batteries are just essentially a formulation of sulfuric acid and water with some copper plates or zinc plates. That's not what we're dealing with lithium-ion batteries. With lithium-ion batteries, the electrolyte that used to be water has now been changed to a petroleum product, carbonate solvent. So the fire hazards have increased dramatically with this. But with that hazard, there's also been the good benefit, which is the energy density increases by almost a couple of orders of magnitude. So you can put a lot of energy in a small space, which is great for residential applications. Now, what exactly are the hazards that we're going to be dealing with? Well, when you look at all of the hazards, these are the hazards that AFD is primarily concerned with. We obviously have the fire hazard, we have the deflagration hazard, and a deflagration is essentially a low speed explosion, which in the term of damage, deflagrations are actually worse because the pressure wave that is developed during this gas energy release moves slower, so it means it does more damage because it moves slower, so it has more time to press against the wall of a structure. Or if you're a human, it's worse because it has more time to compress the fluids in your body. Your body has about 73% water in it. Water is incompressible, so the human body does not take pressure very well because of the fact that if you put too much pressure on the body, it breaks bones, it breaks eardrums, and it can start separating organs, and that's just a bad day. From an emergency response standpoint, we still have other hazards to deal with, which is toxic vapors. We have the actual electrical energy with itself, which we rely on DSD and Austin Energy to help us have systems to deal with that. And then there's something called stranded energy, which is what happens if you have an incident involving this and there's still some energy left over. How do you get rid of those remaining electrons? So there's a number of hazards that we have to deal with. Our big concern that we're going to have is thermal runaway. First of all, I'll say this, that thermal runaway in and of itself, between the International Residential Code or or the International Fire Code, or the National Electrical Code, or the NFPA standard for energy storage, or I'm sorry, between the IFC and the IRC and NFPA 70, the National Electrical Code isn't a defined term. It's mentioned a number of times in the fire code, but it's not a defined term. So what I have is a definition, which essentially, in the most nerdiest way in the world, tells you what it is, which is it's a condition when you have an electrochemical cell, it overheats and it destroys itself through the heat generation. That can be caused by an over discharge, an under discharge, or an abusive condition. So if you drop the device, if you immerse it in water, if you strike it with an automobile, if you intentionally beat on the device with a hammer, that will induce a thermal runaway. There's a lot of things that happen during thermal runaway, but what happens is that you get a discharge predominantly of flammable gases. And those flammable gases include hydrogen and carbon monoxide. So that in of itself presents a hazard, a very significant fire hazard. And it also presents an increased hazard of toxicity to the occupants inside the building. What kind of gases are generated, the amount that's generated is actually cell chemistry specific, which is its own area of study, which I've been spending a lot of time dealing with. The other thing is that you have to remember is that the higher the state of charge, the greater the energy that's released. So if you have most of this equipment is all going to have a very high state of charge because that's what the property owner wants. But when you have a high state of charge, the event will be is violent and it's fast, as I'll show you in this video. Now, for context, that's about a 9 kilowatt hour system. And that is a fire test that was performed at the University of Texas at Austin by a research group that's in their School of Mechanical Engineering. AFD has been working with UT on this issue. UT Austin is recognized as a major researcher in this area, and we've been on the periphery assisting UT looking at this from an emergency response standpoint, but we're also looking at it from the standpoint of are the current codes adequate or inadequate. And so one of the things I do want to do before I move on to this is just to show this again in a little bit easier context. I want to stop right there. What you're seeing there is those are the solvent that's in the batteries, the carbonate solvent beginning to disassociate. And what is occurring is that that gray smoke is actually those solvents being evaporated and being heated at the same time. As thermal runaway occurs, there is a lot of hot metal debris that is released. And when that occurs, ignition occurs. So it's important for everybody to understand in the context of what we're dealing with. If somebody says thermal runaway won't be so bad, I beg to differ. Sorry. So what is our regulatory authority? Well, our regulatory authority is established, but it's also limited. And I'll explain that. In the 2021 IFC, Section 1207 establishes the requirements for electrical ESS. Now, our requirements don't care about the chemistry because there's other energy systems out there besides lithium-ion batteries. There's flow chemistry, there's supercapacitors. We have requirements for those, but our authority is established to regulate all of these energy systems and even upcoming new technologies is established in Section 1207. It's also extended in certain cases to the 2021 International Building Code and the 2021 International Residential Code for these systems. We have provisions that apply to both indoor and outdoor installations, and in all cases, we're going to require compliance with the 2020 National Electrical Code. Now, There's been a number of people have asked us, do I have to have a permit for this from AFD? The answer is no. If you have a residential energy storage system that is regulated under the IRC, there is not a permit that is required. The AFD has never issued an above ground hazardous material permit for any IRC regulated building because we don't have the capabilities to deal with it. And it's just a hazard that has to be accepted as time and technology occurs. Now, there are provisions, though, that do become applicable in the International Residential Code, section R328, for any ESS storing greater than 1 kWh. If it is a commercial installation, our requirements come into play if you're installing a system with more than 20 kilowatt hours of energy, whether it's indoors or outdoors, and our requirements apply to both stationary systems or mobile systems, and it's not limited by the new technology. So if somebody comes on with, for example, the solid state lithium ion batteries, we would actually address those right now. And just in case you're asking, there is a fire hazard with solid state lithium ion battery technology. It does not appear to be as severe as it is with the current liquid chemistry, but it's there, and it's going to, so the hazards are not going to go away with that, what everybody believes is the next evolution. So what's the reason for this? Why in the heck is AFD involved in all this? Well, our goal, as is the same goal of DSD, and it's the same goal of anybody that's installing this equipment, is we're trying to limit the fire and explosion hazards that occur with energy storage systems that are formulated using a carbonate solvent, which is a hydrocarbon. The National Electrical Code looks at these systems because of, from the perspective of, to eliminate the risk of electrocution. The NAC also looks at it from the perspective of the equipment in cases where it may off gas as a normal process or operation, that there is adequate mechanical ventilation, and that the equipment is resistant to certain chemical effects. But its scope stops there. None of the model codes even talk about stranded energy, which is an area of concern for the responders, especially when we start getting into commercial installations. But that's another subject. Let's just tell you what it is. It's a box of watts. That's all. That's what we look at it as. It's just a big box of watts, and our goal is we keep the watts in the box. We don't want to see or witness a thermal runaway. We don't want to respond to an event involving a thermal runaway, but we're already doing it with incidents involving vehicles. We haven't experienced it yet on stationary installations in residences, but we have experienced thermal runaway events that have occurred with mobility devices, the rideshare scooters. We've had a number of incidents involving those. So we've experienced it with things with wheels. We haven't experienced it with anything without wheels, but we're assuming we're going to deal with it, and it's going to happen very shortly. So what's the premise of a lot of this? What is the premise of the IRC provisions? What are the provisions of the fire code requirements? Well, everything is based upon, this whole process is based upon a test. And if you have an energy storage system, both the IFC and the IRC require that it be tested in accordance with UL 9540A. This is a test method, right? This is not a listing. So let's just be clear on that right up front. What I'm going to talk about is the test method, because the test method is what's driving this. The test is titled, it's evaluating thermal runaway propagation in a battery energy storage system. And it's about an 80-page standard. And what it does is it establishes the testing requirements for any lithium-ion battery ESS when it's as a part of the process of it obtaining its listing in accordance with UL 9540A. 9540A is actually broken up into 4 different progressive levels of evaluation, where they begin with the individual cell, and then from there it progresses into what we call the module, which is the box of watts, which contains the cells connected together in series, parallel, or series and parallel. And then the box itself is evaluated from the standpoint of flammability, but most importantly is the energy storage management system in that box that is controlling what's coming in and what the voltage is coming in, the voltage going out, the interconnection of the voltage to other modules that are making up the energy storage system, temperature, outflow of voltage, incoming voltage. It's doing all of those steps to keep the system stable. What a lot of people don't realize is that the report that is prepared in accordance with UL 9540A does not provide you a pass-fail criteria. It doesn't tell you if it's acceptable or not. All it says is that it met these certain requirements, and when it goes into thermal runaway, this is what it's going to do. Final approval for the energy storage system rests with the fire code division under UL 9540A and under the IFC. And in the IRC, it defers certain sections of that to the fire department, specifically as it relates to clearances, and specifically as it's related to how much energy you can store at a single family dwelling. So this is part of the reason that AFD is involved is that at the end of the day, somebody has to review the UL 9540A report and has to evaluate the data. As I said, there's a test schematic that goes on with regards to this. This next slide shows you what's going on through this. I know it's a pretty detailed graphic, but what's occurring is that there are performance requirements that occur on this, where there is a lot of information based upon the amount of flammable gases that are going to be produced, which starting at the cell level and then at the module level, it then talks about can thermal runaway be contained within the module itself, which is the box of watts, or can it not be contained within it? And if it doesn't contain it with it, we then get into the unit level. And the unit level is important because now we have to look at the temperatures that were generated in the fire or in the fire test and look at this from the standpoint of, can I put this inside of a building? Or if I do put it inside of a building and my building is of combustible construction, what are my separation distances from walls and ceilings? What's the separation distance if I have 2 or 3 ESSs installed inside of a building? What occurs if I have flaming debris? Will it ignite adjacent combustible materials? How much radiant energy is being discharged where that radiant energy may ignite combustibles? So there is a whole series of data that has to be evaluated on that. And so for the most part, everything that Austin Fire Department is looking at is coming from the module level test to the unit level test. And those are the tests that we're predominantly seeing for residential energy storage systems. I've not seen one yet for an installation level test, but the installation level test will be the most complicated because on an installation level type of ESS, that means it has to have a fire protection system on. We have not seen that yet, but we're capable of dealing with it, but I haven't seen it in a residential setting. All right. R328 of the IRC. What's it cover? Well, what's it dealing with? Well, it's going to deal with what's defined as an energy storage system. The IRC and the IFC and the IBC, International Building Code, all use the same definition of what an energy storage system is. One or more devices assembled together capable of storing electrical energy to be supplied at a future time. It is not chemistry specific, if you will note. So if you want to use a battery system, that's great. If you want to use a flywheel, which is a common system that's out there, that's allowed. If you want to use a fuel cell, that's okay. But we have requirements for fuel cells and battery systems that are using some form of an electrochemical process, which is what the intent is of the regulations in the IRC and the IFC. The ESS has to be listed to UL 9540A. You'll see a lot of equipment out there that's listed to both UL 1973 and UL 9540. And that's perfectly acceptable. The UL 9540 report delves deeper into the energy storage management system, but essentially those requirements parallel UL 1973. Again, the IRC says it has to be installed in accordance with the National Electrical Code. The IRC also prescribes that the ESS be identified. If there's some labeling on it that identifies that it's an ESS, who was the installer, and there's minimum documentation that has to be provided either to the consumer or just placed with the equipment, so that whoever is taking responsibility for the ESS has at least the working manuals for this equipment. So where can you put them at? Well, there's under the IRC, you cannot put an ESS inside of a sleeping room. You cannot put an ESS inside of a closet or space that opens directly into a sleeping room. So in rooms where people sleep at, an ESS is prohibited. Where you can locate these at is that you can install them in closets, in basements, storage, or utility rooms, but in all cases, the room has to have non-combustible walls and ceilings. The IRC takes this one step further and says your non-combustible material actually has to be a minimum of 5/8 inch type X chipboard. So the IRC goes to the point of being prescriptive, stating that a specific grade of gypsum board type X and a specific thickness type C is allowed. If I've got some contractors on here, they're going, but we like type C gypsum wallboard, or C being Charlie. You can still use it, but the approval to use that is going to rest with the Development Services Department during plan review, and it's going to rest with the building inspector. Type C board is acceptable. It has great fire resistance qualities, and that's what we're trying to do, is compartmentalize these long enough so that the occupants can leave the building. But that determination is going to have to be made by DSD. That is not going to be made by AFD. So in those cases, you'll have to deal with that on the IR, on the residential review side. Another key thing is spacing. There's a provision in the IRC that says you have to have a minimum 3-foot separation between ESSs if we put 2 or more energy storage systems inside of a building or outside of a building. What's the intent of that? Well, the intent of the IRC is to establish a minimum separation distance so that we don't get fire propagation from one energy storage system to another. How do we get around that? Well, we can reduce it, but the IRC specifically says that has to be based upon large-scale fire testing complying with the fire code. When I read the phrase large-scale fire testing, what that means is that this is a unit-level installation. If the fire doesn't propagate beyond the module, that means everything stays inside of the finished box of watts, whoever the manufacturer is, and it stays within that. What happens in a lot of cases, though, we're looking at fire propagation from one energy storage system adjacent to another energy storage system. All right. AFD is working with Austin Energy to try to address this. We're coordinating with them to essentially catalog and standardize this information. And we're doing it not only for the consumers, but we're doing it for the installers, and we're doing it for the specifiers. One of the big areas that are of discussion and commonly asked questions is are certain reductions in clearances or any special installation requirements coming to play? So AFD sat down and went through this and said, how do we break this down into the easiest, most palatable, simplest understood method? And what you're about to see is a drafted process of how we deal with that. This is going to end up being what we're calling the ESS approval list. And now I don't know if that's going to be the final name. That was just the term that came up in a meeting, and we said we'll start with it, but nothing's final until it's final. But the key thing to focus on this is right here, is this particular area right here. Oops, right. I highlight, do something at the same time. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but if you can see my arrow, what we're really going to be focusing on is what this section is called the spacing requirements. So we've built a spreadsheet where this will actually have pull down menus, but I can't make it work in PowerPoint for all the reasons of PowerPoint, where you can look at the clearances based upon if it's an indoor wall mount, floor mount, or if it's an outdoor installation. The other big variable is what is the minimum size of a closet or space that will be required for somebody to install an ESS inside of those spaces. Under UL 9540A, there is gas emission data where the gases are measured that are emitted during thermal runaway. The three big gases that we see are hydrogen, carbon monoxide, those two are flammable, and carbon dioxide, which is not flammable. But carbon dioxide has a unique characteristic. It displaces oxygen. So if I take a whole lot of oxygen out of a room and then I fill it with flammable gases, and then somehow I ignite it, and then a firefighter opens that door, that will cause a deflagration. That will cause a boom. That can possibly destroy the structure, have it collapse on the occupants, have it collapse on the firefighters. So there's a volumetric requirement that comes into play on this. We will catalog all this information so that when you're looking at this from the standpoint of a customer wanting to install it or a inspector looking at this, these are the benchmark factors that have to be looked at so long as it's installed and maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions. This is what we're working on right now. I don't know when it's going to be done, but and part of this is some technology issues on my part where I'm trying to figure out how to make this all fit on a computer screen, which I didn't get a class on that because I started with a Big Chief tablet and number 2 pencil, but we're working through it. All right. So how many boxes of watts or how much energy can you have? That's established in the IRC. Individual energy storage system, regardless if it is limited to 20 kilowatt hours. So any ESS is limited to 20 kWh. If you're inside of a dwelling unit, your maximum stored energy is 40 kilowatt hours or 2 20 kWh systems. When I talk about an IRC regulated building, commonly mention single family dwellings, but the IRC also applies to townhomes and condominiums. Maximum stored energy in an attached or detached garage, accessory structures, or outdoor equipment is 80 kWh. I want more power. You can do that under the IRC. But if you want more energy, if you want to increase these ratings, it now brings you back to the fire code. So if you have a customer that says, I really need 140 kilowatt hours, I need 180 kWh, you can do that. But they're going to have to reach out to AFD on this for a residential application. We'll have to sit down and go through this in greater detail, because then what's going to happen is the fire code requirements are more than likely going to come into play on this. And so, which is a whole different discussion that I won't go into. So what are our specific dwelling safety requirements? Such as in this case where we have a garage on fire, but inside of that garage, this is an ESS. I can tell you this because the fact that this was a fire test that was done Monday of this week with AFD in conjunction with the University of Texas at Austin and Department of Energy and Underwriters Laboratory, where we actually burned a 20 kilowatt hour ESS inside of a garage to see what the fire behavior was. It took lots of measurements. I will tell you, it was a very interesting fire, and that's about as much as I can tell you right now, as I'm here to talk about what we've got in the IRC. But I want to present this to you from the fact that we are learning a lot about this. My reason for showing you this is that we don't have all the answers. So this is what happens when new technology is introduced, and then we start learning things as we move through this through actual testing or incidents. If you install an energy storage system inside of a single family dwelling or a condo, and you locate the ESS in a garage, that's acceptable. But you do have to provide a heat detector in the garage. It has to be a listed heat detector, and it has to interconnect with the smoke alarms inside of the dwelling in accordance with the smoke alarm provisions in the IRC. It has to be protected from vehicle impact if the installation is in an area where it's subject to vehicle damage. What does that mean, Scott? It means all of us drive automobiles. If you think a vehicle is going to hit it, a vehicle will hit it. So you have to locate the ESS where it won't be struck by a vehicle in such a manner to do that. How do I do that, Scott? I don't know, because that's going to be up to the installer and the owner to look at this from a pragmatic, realistic standpoint, to not let that ESS get impact. Because if it is struck by an automobile, you're going to have thermal runaway. You're not going to be able to stop it. Once you mechanically damage that cell, thermal runaway is going to stop, and you can't prevent it. It is going to occur. It's an electrochemical reaction. Do I have to have mechanical ventilation? Generally speaking, digging deeper into this, if you have to have an ESS that's going to require mechanical ventilation, that has to be addressed in the UL 9548 report. And I have not seen that yet. If it's not addressed, but we find that the battery will have flammable emissions during its operation, it's technically allowed under the IRC, but what happens is that it reverts back to a provision in the mechanical code or mechanical provisions in the International Residential Code. The problem is that they linked it to hydrogen generating equipment, which is very specified listed piece of equipment, which is not the same as thermal runaway. So remember what happened during thermal runaway. The equipment destroyed itself. So in that particular case, if somebody asks us about it, I'm going to push it right back onto you or to the owner or the installer and say, I'll need a technical report and opinion from a registered professional engineer who looks at the UL 9540A gas emissions data and figure out how to put a mechanical ventilation system in a single family home that works also in accordance with the International Electrical or Energy Conservation Code. I will just say good luck with that, but it probably can be done. With that, are there any questions? Yeah. Anything else? Radio silence.
Hey, Scott, I think there was a question from Ray at Lighthouse earlier. I'll read it off for you. He was
Actually,
asking.
let me jump back in to Teams and maybe. Yeah, just go ahead and ask me the question and I'll go ahead and jump off.
Okay, so he asked, aren't different chemistries vastly different for fire hazards? And then he asked, lithium iron phosphate is supposedly much less prone to fire hazards such as thermal runaway. So I guess you can address those.
Sure. Yes. Thermal runaway, the fire, the amount of energy that is released and the volume of gases that are released do vary between the type of chemistry. But it's an interesting marketing exercise because of the fact that you saw what was released during that thermal runaway test. Every year at Christmas, I'm going to give you some context here. Every year at Christmas, either Austin Fire Department or some fire department, Central Texas, ignites a Christmas tree, the dried out Christmas tree. We tell you, remove the Christmas tree because of the fact that it'll burn, it will ignite your house, it will harm your family, it could kill you. The heat release rate on that Christmas tree is about 500 kilowatts. Okay. That energy storage system that you saw undergoing thermal runaway released almost 2,000 kilowatts or 2 megawatts of energy. Now, I don't remember the chemistry on it, but the thing of it is that when we start getting into these things where we start getting these extremely high heat release rates and we dump all this energy really fast, your survivability is going to be pretty low unless we can get you out of that building and keep it within that compartment of fire origin until AFD gets on scene. Now, in defense of the entire energy storage system industry, they have been working very hard and they make some really good, safe equipment. But with that said, we have to understand what what the thermal runaway hazard is. And so I've had a lot of people approach me and say, for example, LFP chemistry is safer than NMC chemistry, or is safer than that chemistry. I can guarantee you this, they will all undergo thermal runaway, and it will be an event that somewhat looks like whatever you're going to see. I'm also going to tell you it's going to emit a lot of hydrocarbon gases. It's also going to emit a lot of carbon monoxide and a lot of hydrogen. It is going to be an intensive fire inside that structure. It is possible, based upon what I observed Monday, that we could probably hold it to the room of origin if we can get everybody out of the house. But this is a lot of compacted energy in a very small box. So there is a fire hazard. Don't focus on the chemistry. Recognize the hazard. Any other questions?
Let's see, Mark, I saw you just asked a question in the chat. Feel free to ask that directly to Scott right now if you want, or I can read it off.
Can I see it in the chat?
Yeah, it should be the most recent one.
So we need a clear interpretation on sidewall installation, as there's too much difference from one A and E inspector to another. All right, there's 3 questions in this. So I'm going to go with the 3 questions in one thing. I understand that there may be differences in interpretations being in between inspectors. I understand that. I am empathetic to that. That is why I am trying to put this, my AFD is putting this together, because if you're going to get the inspections, we're going to get the questions, because AFD does residential plan review. And I'm expecting that some of the residential plans examiners at DSD may start looking into this also. A second question that was asked: why is a vehicle with a 50 kilowatt hour capacity able to park and charge without a heat detector required? Answer: AFD doesn't regulate vehicles. Vehicles are regulated by the Federal Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Vehicles undergo crash tests. A particular requirement is in a crash test that the energy storage system must maintain certain electrical safety for a speed of up to 55 miles per hour. So it's a vehicle that's been approved, that has certification from the Federal Highway Traffic Safety Administration. It's a vehicle that has been licensed by some state to operate on the roadway. And so I don't have any authority. The only authority we have is how you hook it up to charge it back into your house. The third question: could also being parked to a vehicle next with 25 gallons of gasoline be a hazard? But why doesn't that require a heat detector? Because I've been parking a lot of automobiles and a lot of garages for over the past 50 years. And our fire loss history says just because you have the gasoline there doesn't mean that you're going to burn your house down. I've been doing it in parking garages for at least the past 30 years. We are looking at this from a risk standpoint. There's a lot of risk that we have already accepted. And we have a lot of fire loss history that says you can have these incidents, but these incidents are fairly low probability. What you're dealing with today is a new hazard that has been come out just within the past 3 to 4 years that is moving extremely fast with absolutely no data to deal with it. But as we're gaining more fire test data, we do know that certain levels of protection are required. If a person wants to install an energy storage system, that is fine, but there is an increased fire hazard. How is that fire hazard dealt with? Simple heat detector interconnected with smoke detectors in a single family dwelling, so long if it's parked in a garage. And that's how it's dealt with. Next question.
Well, there are no more in the chat. So if anybody has any more, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly. But yeah, the chat is done.
All right. That means my mission is complete, and I turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate that presentation, as do we all.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Excellent. Well, y'all, if you do have any more questions that you think of in relation to this presentation from AFD, feel free to email them to solarinspections@austinenergy.com, and we can forward those over to the fire department. But otherwise, I'll just take us through the last motions here. As always, at the end of these presentations, we have the lists of who to contact for questions regarding your solar installations and inspections. Here are all the helpful links regarding our programs, our solar education course, solar inspections, and the like. And on the next couple slides, we have additional helpful contacts. If we go to the next one about, for instance, requesting to have a meter seal cut, who to contact for disconnect reconnects, where to go for meter variance approval requests. Next slide, please. And then on this slide, we have questions about where to send your DGPAs for review when needed, when they're 50 kW or more, or if they're on the downtown network. Questions about permitting. I actually think that email address needs to be removed, but I'll take care of that later. So anyway, any other things that you need in regard to your solar interconnection, any questions you have, this contact list should cover, I think, most of those concerns. And another note on the bottom of that slide is that while Austin Energy does not issue formal documentation for PTO, as a reminder to those of you who may be new here, if your customer does need PTO proof for their financing institution, feel free to reach out to us and we can issue a letter as an exception there. All right, and with that, that concludes our entire general meeting for today. So if anybody has any general questions or specific questions, feel free to ask them here while there's still time, but otherwise, just make sure to sign your name and company in the chat before you sign off. And thank you all for joining us today.